It gives me great pleasure to address you today, though it is virtual and remote, but this is the reflective of the times in which we live and the way in which we are working these days. Respected Chancellor of Nitte University, Vice Chancellor, Pro Chancellors, the officers of the university, Professor Kasturi Rangan, on whom an honoris causa will be conferred today and who's one of the great scientists of India, officers and students of the university, as well as guests. I'm Soumya Swaminathan, and I'm the Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization. And for the last 9 months, have been deeply involved in the response to the pandemic. We, of course, are living in unprecedented times. This convocation is happening at an unprecedented time, but it is good to see that life goes on, that things go on, that particularly education, that there is no break in these critical areas of our lives. Though there are many other areas, of course, that we have put a break to and which can wait, which are not urgent priorities. But health and education are very, very important. I'd like to say a little bit perhaps about where we are today in the pandemic and what we can look ahead to, and also reflect on the lessons that I have learned for science and for public health. So, we are achieving rather grim milestones this week, crossing over 32 million known cases and over a million deaths. And we know that this is the tip of the iceberg, that there are probably 10 times as many cases as have been diagnosed, and probably many, many more deaths than have been counted. A pandemic is not something that we see frequently. This is probably the biggest, and let's hope the worst one that we're going to see in our lifetimes. But the fact is that over years, viruses have made the jump from the animal kingdom to human beings. We've seen it with HIV, we've seen it with the SARS-1 virus, with Zika, with Nipah virus, with Ebola, and there's a long list of other less known viruses which cause small outbreaks and epidemics, which do not become global pandemics. But this kind of jumping of viruses from animals to humans, it happens. And this is why the concept of One Health is so important. The way in which we are living in harmony with environment and with the animal kingdom is very critical. And as human beings have been sort of exerting their own footprint to the detriment of the environment, what we call the Anthropocene era, we are deforesting at a rate that is unimaginable. The Antarctic is melting. Glaciers around the world are melting. We see the forest fires, the floods, the unprecedented weather events that have happened more and more and more frequently in the past decade. Every year we break temperature records. All of this points towards the inexorable march towards climate change and destruction of the environment. And zoonotic infections also happen when this happens. When we move animals and insects and birds out of their natural habitat by deforestation, by urbanization, we encourage the coming together of species which normally may not have come so close. And also, the illegal trade in wildlife also plays a role, because when you have illegal trade in wildlife, these animals are getting moved into markets and are getting exposed to other domesticated animals and to human beings, creating an environment where viruses can actually jump from one species to another. So while we are still investigating the origins of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and what animal was the intermediate host, we believe that the virus originated from bats, but that there may have been an intermediate host, and that is work in progress. So WHO, working with FAO, with the International Organization for Animal Health, are promoting this concept of looking at One Health, both to prevent future pandemics and also to address the issues of antimicrobial resistance, where again the use of antibiotics in animals, the waste and spillover of antibiotics into the environment, into the soil and water, and the inappropriate use of antibiotics in humans all contribute to antimicrobial resistance. And in a way, we can actually imagine now what it would be like to have pathogens with no cures, just as we are seeing with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. If we had bacteria which are currently treatable, but if they became resistant, you would see a same thing happening with bacteria, which could spread around the world, killing people, for which no drugs are working. So it's a very serious situation that we have to take action on today. So, as we think about the pandemic and how we recover from it, how we rebuild for the future, we need to also think about these other big major threats to humanity. And two of them are climate change and antimicrobial resistance. We need to invest in a future which is greener and which is more sustainable. And we have seen that many of our health problems today come from social and environmental determinants of health and risk factors, which are not purely related within the healthcare system. The healthcare system is designed to detect and treat diseases and keep people well. It's more focused on the curative aspects. But if you really look at what causes the majority of illness or health problems, we have to think upstream. We have to think about prevention and health promotion. So, what are those risk factors or determinants of health? These are straightforward. They are things like having clean water, having sanitation, clean air. So, 9 out of 10 people today breathe air which is of not of the quality that is considered healthy. 9 out of 10 people globally. And we know that air pollution is a huge problem in many cities in India. Housing, shelter, nutrition, access to nutritious, balanced meals, not just the macronutrient content, but micronutrients as well. Physical exercise, mental health, road safety. We know that over 100,000 people die of road traffic accidents every year in India alone. Globally, it's over 1.3 million. These are all factors. Tobacco and alcohol are the other two, which need action, which is, first of all, it's more on the preventive side, on the upstream side, but it's also related to other departments or agencies, not within, let's say, the ministries or departments of health. And this is where the concept of the all of government approach and the all of society approach really come in a big way. And health needs to be considered in every policy that is made. We need to look at what is the repercussions on health for having a certain policy. It may be related to agriculture. It could be related to the way water is being managed. It could be related to the way that roads are being designed or housing is being designed. All of these things ultimately play an important part in our health, and particularly we need to focus on our cities. We know that cities are growing across the world. People are moving from rural into urban areas, and if cities grow in an unplanned way, then they will contribute to further ill health and further inequities. We've seen that the pandemic has also exposed the inequalities in society. They have worsened the inequities. So people who are the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, and the minorities in countries around the world, we've seen they're disproportionately affected. So the CDC, for example, came out with data showing that the mortality rate among the Black and the Hispanic populations in the US was perhaps 2 times that of the white American population. Similarly, in the UK, we've seen data that shows that the British Asian minorities, African and Asian ethnic minorities, had a much higher incidence of the infection and a much higher incidence of severe illness, hospitalization, and death. So socio-economic disparities impact health outcomes. This is something that we've known all along, but it's become very clear now during the pandemic. So perhaps when we are looking ahead, some of the lessons that we've learned now, from the data that has come, is something we need to apply into planning for future health systems. Like I said, focusing on health promotion and disease prevention, as well as on making sure that people who have an illness are diagnosed and taken care of. In terms of investments into research, I think here again we've seen that the solutions for getting over the acute phase of the pandemic have come from science, will come from science. And from the very beginning, WHO, we were focused on this aspect. So from the day that we came to know about this new virus or the new pneumonia, unusual pneumonia cases that were happening in Wuhan, and very soon after that, the genetic sequence of the virus was made publicly available on January the 11th. So within 2 weeks, we already knew that there was this new coronavirus, and we knew its genetic sequence that actually enables scientists both to work on diagnostics. So within 2 days, in fact, we had the diagnostic SOPs, standard operating procedures, reagents were being prepared and shipped out, and labs around the world were able to set up their RT-PCR to diagnose infection. And it was because the genetic sequence of the virus was made available so soon. So this is quite a contrast to what has happened in the past. Secondly, vaccine development also started very soon. Again, because investments in platforms, vaccine platforms, over the last few years by organizations like CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, and other funding agencies, had created vaccine platforms where you could quickly use it to develop a vaccine for a new or an unknown pathogen. Now, the WHO in 2016 developed something called the R&D blueprint. This is a framework to address the research needs of rare pathogens which can cause terrible disease, but which are neglected because they are rare or they occur in localized outbreaks. And so there isn't a lot of investment. There isn't really a market demand for diagnostics or vaccines or drugs. At the same time, these are important. So the R&D blueprint actually lays out a roadmap for how you would go about developing a diagnostic, a therapeutic, or a vaccine for a list of these 10 diseases. Most of them are these viral infections like Ebola and Lassa fever, MERS, Nipah, etc. But on that list was a disease called pathogen X or disease X, which means that an unknown disease can occur at any time with a pathogen which is most likely to be a virus and most likely to be a zoonotic virus and most likely to be a respiratory pathogen. So all this was predicted several years ago, and scientists knew that this would happen one day. It was a question of when and not if that there would be a pandemic caused by this type of a virus. So we were prepared with this R&D blueprint. We activated that. We got the networks of scientists together. The blueprint actually regularly convenes a global coordinating mechanism. There's a scientific advisory group. So all that was in place, and so we were able to move very rapidly. And by the middle of February, we had developed a research roadmap. 400 scientists from around the world, including from India, took part in those discussions. And in July, we had an update where we were able to listen to all the new knowledge that has been generated and what are the remaining knowledge gaps. And so as part of that, we also had groups that started working on vaccine development, on developing core protocols for research, on standardizing laboratory assays, on harmonizing animal experiments, and especially to assess new vaccines or new drugs. And all of that has really helped. And this involved both public sector and private sector, because we know that ultimately the development of products happens in the private sector. So you need that collaboration. You need public agencies, government agencies, academic institutions, and the private sector to work together. And the private sector has come forward in a big way, and many of them have made commitments to sharing technologies, to sharing knowledge. So there's also been a lot of open data sharing, open knowledge sharing. We need to promote that and make it much more sustainable for the future. So I think some of the lessons that we are learning on how product development can be accelerated. We have never seen things developed at this speed. We've now got rapid antigen tests, we've got rapid antibody tests, we've got a variety of RT-PCR platforms. We have a lot of innovative new diagnostics also being developed using different novel technologies. We've seen that vaccines have gone from the lab into human testing within a matter of 3 to 6 months. All of this is unprecedented. And so we've proved that it's possible, that it can happen. And if it can be done for the COVID-19, there's no reason why we can't do it for other diseases like tuberculosis, like malaria, which take lives, millions of lives every year, and for which we have not really accelerated the pace of R&D as we have been able to do. So I think for me, that's a very big learning, and also the model of open sharing, of having technology pools, which enable rapid uptake of technology and rapid dissemination of technology and knowledge, sharing of data, sharing of health data. So we, of course, get data from countries around the world on certain statistics, but it's possible to go much beyond that. The way we have learnt about the disease, its clinical manifestations, and its treatment has all been because people have been sharing the data as soon as possible through these open access journals. All journals have made their COVID material open access, but also through preprint archives. And another lesson that we can learn is that clinical trials need to be coordinated and conducted in a way in which you can answer the questions. What we've seen is a proliferation of clinical trials and studies, with over 5,000 being registered in the clinical trial registry platform, but very few of them actually yield results which are useful. So we've seen a few good examples of large trials, including the WHO Solidarity trial, which have been able to enroll large numbers of patients across multiple countries. So, you also get that diversity to be able to answer questions on whether a certain drug works or doesn't work for this disease. And we want to do the same thing for vaccines in order to enable as many vaccine candidates as possible to have a good chance of being tested and proved to be effective and safe or not. We need that robust scientific evidence to help us for the future. So again, we're learning about how coordination and collaboration and scientific global collaboration can help drive knowledge very, very fast, very quickly. And people have come forward and been willing to work together. So that's another very positive outcome for me. And the last thing is really about science communication and how the public trust in institutions, in scientists, and in messaging can be improved. And we've done a lot of work on this because we realized early on that there was a proliferation, huge, of knowledge. We, in fact, coined the term infodemic. So you have the pandemic and the epidemic, but you also have an infodemic. You are flooded with information. And a lot of it is untrue or misinformation or false. For ordinary people, it's very difficult to tell the difference. And so what that results in is a big questioning of science itself, because people then get confused. They think scientists are changing their mind all the time. But in fact, that's how science actually evolves. Science is not black and white, neither is it one day to the next. It is an incremental process. As scientists, we all know that knowledge, evolves over time. And you have to change your policies based on the new knowledge. You don't get fixed just because you said something 3 months ago, but today the knowledge you have is different. You need to adapt to that. So this is where the lay person thinks that scientists got it wrong, but it's not that. So we have to explain how science functions to people, and we also have to communicate to them in a language that they understand. Simple language, giving examples, doing animation. So we've worked to really try to address this. We worked with social media companies, tech companies. We work with over 40 tech companies to make sure that our messages go across. So we have bots which you can access in WhatsApp for I think in 25 or 26 languages now. We have, of course, all our social media platforms where we regularly have question answer sessions. We have press conferences, initially daily, now twice a week, for the right from the beginning of the pandemic, where we talk to journalists from around the world. We have a Mythbuster page on our website where you can go and see the common myths and we give the real facts. And we work with social media companies to address false or misleading posts or articles which we flag to them, and they immediately either take it off or they put a big disclaimer on top of that. So because we know that social media can be used both to drive good things and disseminate good information, but also it could be used to disseminate rumors and things which actually tend to spread much faster. So we have to be all the time addressing that, and especially now with vaccines, with a lot of discussion going on, and some of it is raising questions about when a vaccine will be available, how is a vaccine tested, can you be sure that it is safe and effective when it is made available. So it's really important for us to understand what questions people have and to be able to address them, and to be open and transparent and explain the facts and be driven by data and science. And finally, I would like to say that, when we look around the world, we see countries that have done well in controlling the outbreak. Very early on, they acted fast. There was strong political leadership. They acted on the advice of scientists and public health experts, and they contained the infection, and many of them have been able to keep it low, though of course you can't eliminate the virus, so you will get outbreaks and clusters from time to time, but those can be controlled using the public health measures that we know work. But we've also seen the opposite. We've seen, countries where the infection has gone out of hand, where there hasn't been that good communication with people, and where people also have not really followed because of their lack of trust or because of the politicization of, very basic things like wearing a mask, for example. It's just a public health measure, and so it should be treated as that. So I think we need to look at all of these things and reflect on them and think about the future and how we might want to handle and what we would need to do to prepare ourselves. And I think, ultimately I would say that we need to think about really building up our institutions, building the scientific capacity and capability, ensuring that there is collaboration between the various scientific institutions and scientific agencies, because that always helps. You have a lot of competencies, but they may be scattered. So once you bring them together in a network, then you're much stronger together. Science communication is extremely important. And looking ahead to the future, I think really thinking in a much more holistic manner about health in relation to the environment that we live in, and in relation to trying to have a more sustainable future for all of us and for future generations. So I'm sure that the students who are getting their degrees and who are going to move on to their next phase of their life have big challenges ahead, but they can also be optimistic and look forward to the future, because it's the next generation that's going to really lead us. We can only share our experiences, and they need to make sure that the world that we are living in, going to enter, is going to be greener, it's going to be safer, and it's going to be fairer for everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And again, congratulations to all those who are graduating or getting their degrees today. And thanks to the university for having invited me to share my thoughts with you.